Welcome back, Honors. All right, welcome to your weekend, and I know you're looking behind me, and you're like, but you're still in your classroom, Mr. Terry. Well, we're getting into it a little bit right now, all right? So we're doing this flip before we even leave for the weekend, right? So you guys can bang this out, be ahead of the game. We won't feel too much pressure to get everything done going into your test that's going to be on, Thursday, right? So y'all will be taking your, Thursday. Good stuff. All right, now. Excuse me. All right, now getting into it, though. We are going to be, like we talked about in class, St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, right? We talked about the transfer from the Valois family to the Bourbon dynasty of France. We got into some of the really weak kings, right? We talked about the French wars of religion a little bit, about the feuds between the Huguenots and the Protestants and things like that, right? So, or not the Huguenots and the Protestants. The Huguenots are Protestants, all right? So the Huguenots and the French Catholics. We got into several of these different little things, right? Now, going forward, though, we also talked about the first Bourbon king after Henry. We talked about the Edict of Nantes, which you need to underline. It is going to be a fill-in-the-blank question on your test, right? Because I'm asking you specifically for that document that allowed it's a very, very, very pivotal document. So very pivotal document because it allowed Protestants to practice freely and even have jobs in the government, but the official religion of France would actually remain Catholicism. And going forward, though, that thing, of course, will be revoked by the guy we're talking about now. And the best thing we got into is we started talking about your boy, Louis Duodon, the gift from God, Louis XIV himself, the thing that your state is aptly named after, right? Notice I said thing on accident, all right? But, so this guy grew up thinking his entire life that he was a gift from God, right? He thought that he was the light for his people because of one ballet he performed in, right? Because he was a big, big fan of ballets and whatnot. But going forward, though, it's really important to understand physical representations of his power, right? And one of the best examples, or the best example of the physical representations of his power that we may have gotten into a little bit in class already, is talking about the Palace of Versailles, which, as you can see from its overhead view right here, this is the entryway, right, with the very, very long boulevard leading up to it. This is the city that branches off of it, and this is how you actually enter in. This is where the horses would always present themselves. That is the Golden Gate that you come through, and the gardens are off the back side. Just to give you an understanding of this place, right, it used to just be a hunting chateau, all right, built by Louis XIV's forefathers. However, it was going to be developed by Louis XIV into the best example of Baroque architecture and absolutely gorgeous, stunning views that you've ever seen in your life. This is absolutism at its finest, right? This is the backyard of Louis XIV, right? This is what he could walk through at any moment, this giant palace that has over 700 rooms. It has over 12,000 windows. It has several thousand pieces of furniture. I can never remember how many it is. Hey, Alexa, how many pieces of furniture are there in the Palace of Versailles? You really shut me out? Hey, Alexa, how many pieces of furniture are there in the Palace of Versailles?
Here's something I found from the article Pavlov's Palace on Wikipedia. 16 sets of furniture, over 200 pieces, were ordered from Paris between 1783-85 for the state rooms.
Well, that's not good enough. All right, so anyway, there are several thousand different pieces of furniture, many of them gilded in gold with the face of Louis XIV on it himself, right? So, absolutely stunning. That is the golden entryway of his lordship himself. There is his Sun King emblem right there, right? As you can see with a little close-up zoom, because, of course, he believed he was like Apollo and provided the light for all of his people. All right, now, and we talked about several different things with him, right? And I may or may not have gotten into a very important quote that will also be a fill-in-the-blank on your test, even though, ironically enough, he probably never said it. L'état c'est mourir. But anyway, it's all good, right? So this is the entrance into the Palace of Versailles. Notice the black and white marble floor that they allowed horses to actually walk on and drop off their guests, right? Like, so the Palace of Versailles is absolutely gorgeous. This is the king's room, right? Notice the drapery around the edges of the bed, right? The four-poster bed, the Persian rugs and wall tapestries that cost thousands of dollars, and the gilded walls everywhere. This is the queen's bedroom right here. Absolutely magnificently gorgeous. Some of you are immediately like, wait a minute, why are they in separate bedrooms? Because Louis actually had more kids with his mistresses than he did with his actual queen, right? Now, continuing to go forward, though, this is the most famous location, to me anyway, personally. I believe this is the most famous location inside the Palace of Versailles. This is the Hall of Mirrors, right, where Louis loved to host his parties, right, where there are Italian-style frescoes and murals all over the tops of the ceilings, chandeliers in every corner, gilded statues everywhere, and mirrors to make it appear as if there were even more people within his royal court, all right? So, because that's the thing about Louis. He always loved his court life, right? So that's like getting into it, right? We got to talk about Louis's power really quick, right? The biggest example of absolutist control by Louis XIV himself is his royal court that he established, right? He ruled from his home, okay? So there were these things, these institutions that existed inside of France at the time called the Parlement of France, right? And every major city had a parlement, all right? So, and the parlement, it sounds a lot like parliament, right? Because that's basically what they were. They were a legislative/judiciary body inside of all the largest cities in France, right? And they were the ones who delegated tax collection and divvied it up and reported back to the king, and they were kind of like a little stoppage of power, right? Well, Louis kind of just took all those out of play when he created a new type of noble and moved all of them into his house, all right? So here's the thing. He allowed every noble to get closer to him by letting them live inside of his home. All right, so in the Palace of Versailles, it has an occupancy level of 20,000 people. So he actually got these nobles to come and live with him as his favorites or confidants, because if you didn't know Louis and he didn't know who you were, he would be like, what are you talking about? I don't know that guy. He doesn't even know me. He doesn't come to see me. He doesn't talk to me, right? He's not one of my favorites, as many of these roles actually picked out. Well, a favorite's only like one or two of them. But like, anyway, so he had these people close to him inside of his royal court, right? Which was this huge council of nobles and princes that carried out his policies, and they even lived at his home with him, right? So he did everything from his house. This is a picture right here of his royal court itself. These are the people within his occupancy. He is greeting a guest coming in his front door, right? These are the people that actually lived inside of his home, okay? Like, he literally had his friends and enemies dangerously close, right? Now, as you can see, though, this is very, very important. Let me go ahead and zoom in on this guy. Notice what this man is carrying right here. See that? All right, so that right there, and well, that's a cane. Right here, though, is a sword, right? So he even invented a new class of nobility, right? So he invented people known as robe nobles, right? So here's the thing, something you got to understand. There were two types of nobles inside of France, right? There are sword nobles, and then there were robe nobles, right? Now, the sword nobles are the old nobility. They worked for the kings. They fought alongside them in battle. They actually earned their nobility status through military action, right? And they were some of the only people allowed to carry weapons inside of like France, and they carried a sword with them everywhere they went, right, as a symbol of their power. Now, Louis, along with his grandparents as well, particularly his grandfather, Henry IV, start selling nobility spots and allowing people to buy their way in so they can have an easy little dispensable amount of pocket money on hand so they can use it at any time, right? So Louis XIV continued this practice and sold nobility to wealthy families. These new nobles were called robe nobles because of the fancy robes that they wore, right? So sword nobles and robe nobles absolutely hated each other, right? So there's going to be a lot of different times that these two classes are going to clash together, right? There was like this one, for example, when Louis was a child, there was like a civil war that occurred in France called the Fronde Rebellions, right? Fronde, where these sword nobles were lashing out against the king and the monarchy, trying to say that Anne of Austria, like Louis XIV's mother, had no right with her possible lover, Cardinal Mazarin, to be making the protocol changes that she was doing throughout all of France, right? So to like try and like collect more taxes and increase tax money on these nobles to try and help provide to stop a lot of these protests and bread riots that were going on. Now, these road nobles, on the other hand, were like puppy dogs for Louis, right? Every time he needed something done, boom, they were the ones that did it, right? One of the highest honors of a road noble was helping Louis pick out his night shirt, his pajamas, helping him pick out his day shirt, what he was wearing that day, and then also assisting him on the toilet, all right? So, like, the road nobles were like his little, they would help him take his shoes off after he rode his horse. They would help him do all kinds of stuff. They would have parties with him every single night because, again, remember, this all relates back to his royal court, this thing that he ruled from home with, right? Something else you got to understand about Louis is he believes in his absolute authority, right? He used to have a phrase where he would say, one king, one God, one law, right? So I'm pretty confident it doesn't go in that order, but it's okay. And it's one faith, actually. So he is an uber Catholic, all right? Big-time Catholic. He actually is even going to revoke the Edict of Nantes, right? He revokes the Edict of Nantes, and he starts destroying Huguenot churches and schools and tries to force conversion on a lot of these Huguenots. So what his grandfather did to try and actually make it possible for Huguenots to step forward following the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, going into the Bourbon dynasty, Louis just says, nah, screw that. You know what I mean? Like, revokes it and starts, like, destroying, like Protestant churches and everything else, right? So, as you can tell, Louis thinks a lot of himself, right? Louis also adopted a very new big financial scheme, right? He's going to end up spending almost the entire French budget on his palaces and funding his royal court. And he does this because he believes that he has a lot more money than he actually does, right? So, now he did have money. Let's not, cross words about that. The man had money. He had a financial advisor by the name of Jean-Baptiste Colbert, right, that helped him adopt mercantilistic policies, right? And mercantilism, of course, is because it's that view, right, the view that these Europeans had during this time period, that there was only a finite amount of money out there, and the biggest thing you had to do was try to have the most of it inside of your country, right? So you do this by exporting more than you import, growing your wealth so you have more money than your neighbors. You increase tariffs, which is a tax on an import, to try and force people to keep buying within inside of your country so the money stays there in the form of taxes collected off of your nobles and things like that. So he adopts these mercantilistic policies and he makes a ton of money. But he is going to die in a tremendous amount of debt, right? So he dies in debt because he started more wars than you can even imagine. You see this number right here, 33 out of 54? He was at war 33 out of his 54 years. He loved to be called Louis the Sun King or Louis the Conqueror, right? Like, he was a big fan of that nickname as well. So, he's a very intense absolutist. He's probably the best example of absolutist authority that you can even really, really look at. Some people argue this and they say, well, I believe that Peter the Great of the Romanovs is the best example of an absolutist because he was pretty progressive, right? Well, I'm not arguing best example of a positive absolutist, or not even an enlightened absolutist like Catherine the Great, or possibly your or Frederick the Great of the Hohenzollern family, right? I'm talking the best one that's an example of does whatever the heck he wants, right? He literally built a house to keep everyone inside of, and the wealth of France lived within his walls, right? Like, the guy is very, very intense. He screams at people, I am the state, right? So, and stuff like that we talked about in class, right? C'est moi. All right, so l'état c'est moi. All right, now he does all this other super intense stuff. He revokes documents that keep people safe. He literally capitalizes off the end of the 30 Years' War coming off of his father's reign and just runs forward and keeps trying to destroy and grow as much power as he possibly can. In the War of Spanish Succession, he actually even tried to grab up as much off as he could as from this little dying, fledgling Spain, right? Because remember when we talked about the English or the Spanish Armada and stuff like that, and how the peak of their power was under Philip, and then following events like the Spanish Armada, Spain's power begins to decline after their little golden age of art and literature and stuff like that. Well, Louis was the one out there trying to grab all that stuff up, right? So that's it. That's your flip for the weekend. We just need to go ahead and finish up Louis. And then on Monday, we're going to get into Russia. And then Tuesday, we're going to start reviewing, right? Yeah, we're going to start reviewing on Tuesday. And for E, we're going to review also for G on Wednesday a little bit. And then we're going to have your test on Thursday. All right, so sound good? Well, we're going to go ahead and do that, and that's going to be about it. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up France, right? We're wrapping up France right now, yep. Russia, etc., getting into it. Good stuff. I'll see you guys later. Have a great one. Have a great weekend.